tabletop is too complicated. Look at all the prep work. I don't want to use pre-made maps, but I can't draw for beans. If only there was a virtual tabletop in my mind. Theater of the Mind might sound like something psychic actors participate in, but here in Nerd Town, Theater of the Mind refers most often to playing a TTRPG without the aid of maps, especially battle maps. No frickin' counting squares and using a ruler to determine line of sight, no measured out templates to see if that fireball just manages to hit all 5 Tarrasques. A player says, "Am I close enough?" And the game master says, "I don't know, sure." A lot of GMs start out using Theater of the Mind or have only ever used Theater of the Mind because it requires very little prep. And honestly, some games are just about chilling and having fun. Put that battle map away. For a lot of you who want to run combat with a little more crunch, or maybe you just use a system that almost requires it, this more ethereal approach to tabletop gaming might not work the best. But there are a lot of great reasons to learn how to do it and how to do it well. But before the how, there is the why. First, Theater of the Mind allows you to improvise details. Yes, a really cool battle map that has every little detail accounted for is rad, but it also takes a lot of time to make and might be limited by your artistic abilities or the assets available. But give me 30 seconds and I can describe a battle map that sounds fantastical and full of possibilities. You enter the King's Dining Hall. You see a 20-foot table lined with chairs that is adorned with a feast of every succulent beast that can be found within a 30-mile radius, and fruits so exotic no peasant in this kingdom would have likely heard of them. You see the length of it backlit by a fireplace so massive you wonder how it doesn't cook diners near the center of the table. That description conjures up a detailed image for the players, but it still leaves plenty of details up in the air. Is there a table in the corner of the room that a player could throw into the fire? Is there a rope of sausages they could use as a lasso? You can just decide all that in the moment. And yes, you absolutely can make some of that up with a battle map in place. But I personally have found that your players are just going to assume that the only stuff there is exactly what they see and nothing more, and not ask about interesting stuff like that. Imagination leaves a lot to the imagination. Second, the Theater of the Mind has no technical disappointments. What do I mean by technical disappointments? Oh, I want to run over to that assassin and smash him with my warhammer. Wait, he's 35 feet away, so I guess technically I can't make it. I'm gonna shoot that sorcerer with my trusty longbow! Looks like his token is just out of the line of sight. Dang it. Now, let me be clear. These are not inherently bad things. A lot of folks like to play with the hard math of it all. They want absolutes, and that's awesome. But plenty of other folks just want to live by the rule of cool, and in the Theater of the Mind, yeah, you can make it to that assassin to attack them because we haven't kept that close a track of it, so sure, you're close enough. And you get a beat on that sorcerer just as he's looking around the corner, so take a shot. And yes, once again, you can do this stuff with actual battle maps, but then it almost feels wrong with all that evidence in front of you. In the Theater of the Mind, there is no evidence, but on a battle map, I see your filthy lies, your foul deeds. Finally, Theater of the Mind is perfect for keeping your campaigns more open-ended. You're ready for your players to get into a fight anywhere at any time. You take all this time to make super cool battle maps where all of your planned battles are, and suddenly your players want to get into a brawl in an alley that you weren't expecting. Typically, you can't prepare for every wild thing your players want to do. And suddenly, when they decide they want to start a barroom brawl, you get to draw something quick that looks like a second grader's last-minute art project. There's nothing wrong with maps like that, but I just find that when I make a bunch of really detailed, awesome maps, I want to use those maps. And they end up kind of subconsciously railroading things to get to them. If I have no maps, it just puts me in a much more open-ended mindset. Now, those are some cool reasons to consider trying theater of the mind style play. And sure, maybe your group doesn't care all that much about combat, so who needs all those crunchy details? But suddenly your group is 5, 6, maybe 7 players big, and they're fighting a dozen enemies, and you're higher level with spells that have very specific details for targeting areas, and the wizard wants to know how many allies they might hit with the fireball cast at 7 baddies who you swear were all behind different pillars, and where's the... Yeah. Even if you're playing fairly fast and loose with combat, eventually your players might want some answers you don't have or be upset with calls you make because everyone remembers the battle layout differently. And with some systems like D&D or Pathfinder, combat can get kinda complicated. So if you do want to use theater of the mind in these systems, here's a few tips to help keep things organized. First and foremost, don't be afraid to tell your players that you need them to keep track of who they are by. Tell them to write it down, and also tell them to write down and keep track of their own danged conditions. No DM should have to keep track of 6 players, 3 of whom are poisoned, 1 of whom has fear for 2 more rounds, and 2 of whom are prone, whilst also tracking all the monsters. Do your part, players. If you are playing in person, make little table tents. You can put conditions on them and even little numbered tents to indicate how many rounds they're going to be affected by it, and you can put enemy names on them to know who's by what, kind of. Another great thing to have is a small whiteboard or chalkboard. Paper's fine, but erasing and all that gets a little illegible after a while, in my experience, so I use a chalkboard to keep track of things. Another great idea is put some of those unused dice to work as miniatures. Now, this doesn't mean you have to start exactly positioning them and figuring out movement. No. Instead, maybe just make a few generalized areas or zones and place dice representing your enemies and players in those zones. Gee, wonder where I got that idea from. Now you have a quick and easy way to keep a rough idea of where everyone is, but there are no hard details, so you still retain all the freedom theater of the mind allows. Finally, even if you don't want to use a full-on virtual tabletop, there are a ton of rad online initiative trackers like improvedinitiative.com. Now, when it comes to keeping track of non-battle map stuff like towns, big buildings, dungeons, having a really basic map can be very helpful for you. You don't even have to draw anything detailed, just do one of those circle line things. Write the names of rooms, important details about them, how they connect, and boom, dungeon maps in minutes with all the freedom and flexibility you've come to crave, you mind thespian! I know there's this huge push for fancy battle maps and stuff with remote play and cool 3D printed physical maps becoming so popular, and don't get me wrong, that stuff is cool. I personally make some pretty detailed virtual battle maps sometimes, for some games, when I have the time. But I see some folks out there thinking that they're having a lesser experience if they aren't putting in that kind of effort, and I'm here to tell you that theater of the mind can be amazing. Also, these are just a few tips and thoughts from me on the subject, and while writing this, I read an awesome article from Abyssal Brews on theater of the mind that has some great tips and resources to help you out. Link in the description below. And that's it for this session. If you like this video, how about hitting that like button? Maybe subscribe if you haven't, and the bells. I honestly don't care if you click the bell, but hey, the cool kids do. Twitch sometimes, a tweet to make sillies, is all in the description. Statistically, no one is still watching at this point in the video. Who cares about this stuff that I'm saying? No one. No one's even listening anymore. I can say whatever I want. Butts.